Alright, hello folks. In this episode I'm gonna continue my read-along of the Manifesto of the Communist Party. I've done the first two parts already, so I'm going on the chapter 3. Socialist... Shut up, Carp! Socialist and Communist Literature. Reactionary Socialism. Feudal Socialism. Chapter 3, Part 1, Section A. Owing to the historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeoisie society. In French Revolution of July 1830 and in the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political struggle was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible. But even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy was obliged to lose sight, apparently, of its own interest, and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus the aristocracy took their revenge by signing lampoons on their new masters and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. Whoa! In this way arose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half an echo of the past, half menace of the future, at times by its bitter, witty and incisive criticism striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect, though total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. Alright. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a banner. What in the hell? The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a banner. I don't know what alms bag means. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coats of arms, and deserted with loud and irreverent laughter. One section of the French legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle. In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forged that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different and that are now antiquated. In showing that under their rule the modern proletariat never existed, they forget that the modern bourgeoisie is a necessary offspring of their own form of society. Of course, if you haven't seen my two other episodes, I think the reason for which he says this is that everything is class struggle. So the new bourgeoisie is actually created just because the old bourgeoisie cannot exist. So the old bourgeoisie has created the new bourgeoisie. Alright. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amounts to this: that under the bourgeoisie regime, a class is being developed which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class, and in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stoop to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot, sugar and potato spirits. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Declaimed? What is declaimed? Has it not preached in the place of these charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burnings of the aristocrat. Christian socialism. So Christianity, as far as I know, is like the root ideology which brings forth the individual. Socialism is like group all the way. So Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burnings of the aristocrat. I don't know what he means by Christian socialism. Very weird statement. Petty bourgeoisie socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not the only class whose conditions of existence pinned and perished in the atmosphere of modern bourgeoisie society. The medieval bourgeoisie and the small peasants proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed industrially and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeoisie has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie, and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeoisie society. All the time, what this guy does is that he puts class struggle as the precondition of human existence. It's like this is all that people do. Up so far for section, up until section B that we have read, this is what I'm getting, like this is where he means to aim at. These are the problems that have existed so far in the class struggles, and this is how later on communism is going to end those struggles, by creating the idealist ideology of eternal prosperity, which is of course in the communist ideology genocide. So the individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition, and as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced in manufacturers, agriculture and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs and shopmen. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half of the population, it was natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use, in their criticism of the bourgeoisie regime, the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeoisie, and from the standpoint of these intermediate classes, should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeoisie socialism. Sismondi was the head of this class, not only in France but also in England. This school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradictions in the conditions of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labor, the concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction and crisis. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeoisie and peasants, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequalities in the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, the dissolution of old moral bonds, of the old family relations, of old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and of exchange, and with them the old property relations and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange within the framework of the old property relations that have been, and were bound to be, exploited by those means. In either case, it is both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are corporate guilds for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. So every time I read patriarchal, I get reminded of the feminists that are currently in the 21st century. It's like the patriarchy is the tyrannical patriarchy is the system of the Western world. Every time, which is very funny, by the way. There's like the Western world is the least tyrannical system that has ever been produced by human beings. Like, especially when put in relation to communism or socialism or anything else, but especially against communism. So it's very funny that the man goes against patriarchy. Anyhow, ultimately, when stubborn historical facts had dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception, this form of socialism ended in a miserable fit of the blues. German or true socialism. The socialist and communist literature, right, if you didn't know, Karl Marx was German, so that's very different from Nazi Germany. This, right, okay, so the socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of a bourgeoisie in power, and that was the expressions of the struggle against this power was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers, would-be philosophers, and Beaux spirits, men of letters, eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, this French literature lost all its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, to the German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason, in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified in their eyes the laws of pure will, of will as it was bound to be, of true human will generally. The work of German literati consisted solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophical point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated, namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical words of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of the economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of the bourgeoisie state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticism they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated. Ha ha ha! Communist literature. And since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirement of truth. Not the interest of the proletariat, but the interest of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realms of philosophical fantasy. I would like to reread this. Alright. Let's focus very much and try with whatever I have to make sense of this. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated. Well, I don't think it should have existed ever. I mean, communism is the height of delusion. And since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirement of truth. Not the interest of the proletariat, but the interest of human nature, man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realms of philosophical fantasy. Human nature and truth are definitely predecessors of communism. Communism is, as I said before, it cannot actually exist unless what you mean it to do is to destroy life. Like, unless that is your purpose, you cannot have it any other way. So the interest of human nature and man in general, who belong to no class or has no reality, these are against one another. Interest of human nature and man in general is not the same as the man who doesn't belong to no class or has no reality. Reality is not optional. It could never be optional. Man does not exist only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. If you have read philosophy, you know that there is little mist there. All that they mean is truth, not misty realm. So, I don't know if this is an open attack, but I read it as consequential attack. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly and exalted its poor stackentroid in such a mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. The fight of the Germans, and especially of the Prussian bourgeoisie, against feudal aristocracy and absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement, became more earnest. By this, the long-wished the long wished for opportunity was offered to true socialism of confronting the political movement with the socialist demands, of hurling the traditional anathemas against liberalism, against representative government, against bourgeoisie competition, bourgeoisie freedom of the press, legislation, liberty and equality, and of preaching to the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by this bourgeoisie movement. German socialism forgot in the nick of time that the French criticism, whose silly echo it was, presupposed the existence of modern bourgeoisie society with its corresponding economic conditions of existence, and the political constitution adapted thereto, that the very things those attainment was the object of the pending struggle in Germany. To the absolute governments with their following of parsons, professors, country squires, and officials, it served as a welcome scarecrow against the threatening bourgeoisie. It was a sweet fish after the bitter pills of flogging and bullets, with which these same governments just at the same time does the German working class risings. Alright, so they have actually manipulated the German working class uprising or upbringings by translating things mistakenly. That's what he means. While this true socialism thus served the government as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it at the same time directly represented a reactionary interest, the interest of German Philistines, whatever you would pronounce it. In Germany, the petty bourgeoisie class, a relic of the 16th century and since then constantly cropping up again under the various forms, is the real social basis of the existing state of things. Alright. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial and political supremacy of the bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction. On the one hand, from the concentration of capital, on the one hand, from the rise of a revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. See, I told you. He means to say that every version of class struggle so far and literature of socialism that had come up so far was actually to be rethought and to be put into true socialism. The robe of speculative cobwebs embroidered with flowers of rhetoric, steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment, this transcendental robe in which the German socialists wrapped their sorry, eternal truths, all skin and bone, served to wonderfully increase the sale of their goods among such a public. And on its part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling as a bombastic representative of the petty bourgeoisie Philistine. It proclaimed to the German nation to be the model nation, and the German petty Philistine to be the typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model man, it gave a hidden higher socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of its real character. It went to the extreme length of directly opposing the brutally destructive tendency of communism, and of proclaiming its supreme and impartial contempt of all class struggles. With very few exceptions, all the so-called socialist and communist publications that now, 1847, circulate in Germany belong to the domain of this foul and enervating literature. Conservative or bourgeoisie socialism. Well, a part of the bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeoisie society. To this section belong economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of the working class, organizers of charity, members of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, temperance fanatics, hole and corner reformers of every imaginable kind. This form of socialism has moreover been worked out into complete systems. We may cite Proudhon's philosophy de la miserie as an example of this form. The socialist bourgeoisie want all the advantages of modern social conditions without the struggles and dangers necessarily resulting therefrom. Alright. They desire the existing state of society, minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for a bourgeoisie without a proletariat. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be best. And bourgeoisie socialism develops this comfortable conception into various more or less complete systems. In requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system and thereby to march straight away into the social New Jerusalem, it but requires in reality that the proletariat should remain within the bounds of existing society, but should cast away all its hateful ideas concerning the bourgeoisie. I haven't actually read any socialist literature, so I don't really know what he's talking about here. But I can read the undertone of what he means. A second and more practical but less systematic form of the socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of the working class by showing that no mere political reform, but only a change in the material conditions of existent economical relations could be of any advantage to them. By changes in the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeoisie relations of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution, but administrative reforms, based on the continued existence of these relations. Reforms that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor, but at the best, lessen the cost and simplify the administrative work of bourgeoisie government. Bourgeoisie only helps bourgeoisie, but it doesn't help people. That's what I get from this. Bourgeoisie socialism attains adequate expression when and only when it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade for the benefit of the working class, protective duties for the benefits of the working class, prison reform for the benefit of the working class. This is the last word and the only seriously meant word of bourgeoisie socialism. It is summed up in this phrase: the bourgeoisie is a bourgeoisie for the benefit of the working class. Critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not here refer to the literature which, in every great modern revolution, has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writings of Babeuf and others. This is a very funny name, Babeuf. Babeuf, Babeuf, however you would pronounce this, but Babeuf is very funny. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in times of universal excitement, when feudal society was being overthrown, necessarily failed, owing to the then undeveloped state of the proletariat, as well as to the absence of the economic conditions for its emancipation, conditions that had yet to be produced, and could be produced by the impending bourgeoisie epoch alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied these first movements of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism and social leveling in its crudest form. The socialist and communist system, probably so called, those of Saint-Simon, Fourier, Owen, and others, sprung into existence in the early undeveloped period, described above, of the struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. See section 1. Okay. I'm not gonna see that. Alright. The founders of this system see indeed the class antagonisms, as well as the action of the decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society. But the proletariat, as yet in its infancy, offers to them the spectacle of a class without any historical initiative or any independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonisms keeps even pace with the development of industry, the economic situation as they find it does not yet offer to them the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore search after a new social science, after new social laws that are to create these conditions. Historical action is to yield to their personal... Alright, phone is ringing, but I'm not gonna answer. Historical action is to yield to their personal inventive action, historically created conditions of emancipation to fantastic ones. What? Fantastic? Historical action is to yield to their personal inventive action, historically created conditions of emancipation to fantastic ones. He means fantastic meaning based on fantasy, maybe. And the gradual spontaneous class organizations of the proletariat to an organization of society especially contrived by these inventors. Future history resolves itself in their eyes in the propaganda and the practical carrying out of their social plans. Oh, I'm tired reading this shit, but whatever. I will read it. Position of the communists in relation to various existing... Alright, go fuck yourself. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of caring chiefly for the interests of the working class, as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The undeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, causes socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the conditions of every member of society, even that of the most favored. Hence, they habitually appeal to society at large, without the distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. For how can people, when once they understand their system, fail to see in it the best possible plan of the best possible state of society? Well, that's exactly my question as to how in the actual hell did you come up with communism? So if you could see it, then how could you fail to give the best system? But you didn't see it, be it on purpose or because you're delusional. Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example to pave the way for the new social gospel. Ew. Such fantastic pictures of future society, painted at a time that the proletariat is still in a very undeveloped state and has but a fantastic conception of its own position, correspond with the first instinctive yearnings of that class for general reconstruction of society. I really think that most of the times you want a construction of society rather than a reconstruction. You have to first convince that society has been created. Chaos is a much more... how do you say this in English? Chaos is... in human behavior in human societies, chaos is much more available than an actual system, an actually built, human-built system of society. You have chaos everywhere. So reconstruction primarily means construction. Construction primarily means that you know how to deal with chaos, which people most certainly fucking don't. Alright. But these socialist and communist publications contain also a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are full of the most valuable materials for the enlightenment of the working class. The practical measures provided in them, such as the abolition of the distinction between town and country, of family, of carrying on of industries for the account of private individuals, and of the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the function of the state into a mere superintendence of production, all these proposals point solely to the disappearance of class antagonism, which were at the time only just cropping up, and which in these publications are recognized in their earliest indistinct and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of a purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development. In proportion as the modern class struggle develops and takes definite shape, this fantastic standing apart from the contest, these fantastic attacks on it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, although the originators of these systems were in many respects revolutionary, their disciples have in every case formed mere reactionary sects. Sects. S-E-E-C-T-S. They hold fast by the original views of their master in opposition to the progressive historical development of the proletariat. They therefore endeavor and that consistently to deaden the class struggle and to reconcile the class antagonism. I don't get so many words here. I don't know why it has to be so word rich. But anyhow, they still dream of experimental realization of their social utopias, of founding isolated phalansteries, of establishing home colonies, or setting up a little Icaria, duodecimo editions of the New Jerusalem, And to realize all these castles in the air, they are compelled to appeal to the feelings and purses of the bourgeoisie. By degrees, they sink into the category of the reactionary or conservative socialists depicted above, differing from these only by mere systematic pedantry, and by their fanatical and superstitious belief in the miraculous effects of their social science. They therefore violently oppose all political actions on the part of the working class. Such actions, according to them, can only result from blind unbelief in the new gospel. The Owenites in England and the Fourierites in France respectively oppose the Chartists and the Reformistas. I don't know what the fuck he's talking about, man. God damn, homie! Alright, so what he did there was oppose current literature of communism. Alright, so let's see for how long this shit goes. Draft of a communist confession. Communist. Are you a communist? No. What is the aim of the communist? Organize. Fuck you. How do you wish to achieve? Kill everyone. Alright, I'm gonna do this another time. The principles of communism. This shit is cancer, by the way. Communism is cancer, bruh. Alright. I just did this. 4 has 1 page, 1 page, 1 page, 5 pages. Alright, so I think I can do up to principles of communism next time, and then do this other shit. Communism is like a, I don't know how to think it, like COVID, but about 100,000 times worse. So if COVID only has lethal effects on already very damaged people, like physically very low immune system people, like they have a heart condition, or they have actual cancer, or they are old, or they have a lung disease or anything, what COVID does is that it intensifies those conditions by many times. And what it results is usually death. What communism does is that it starts with a small thing and it spreads like crazy. Here's how I think it. Here's why I think it's like a virus. So you get to apply communism first of all in all of the countries which are poor, and not only poor, in my opinion, which are like fucking desperate. You apply communism there because in countries which are very poor, there are also a very high level of ignorance and illiteracy. People don't think, people don't read, people don't watch movies, people create an echo chamber of ignorance, and that ignorance is then transformed into violence by application of communism. So when you tell folks that everything is class struggle, and when you tell people that you have been exploited by the rich class, by the bourgeoisie all of your lives, this is human history, says the man. During their entire lives, what has happened is that the high class has exploited the low class. What happens then is that people become angry, but because they are ignorant, they don't know how to deal with the ideology that is presented to them. However, if you were to enforce this ideology with violence, then you get fucking genocide. So it starts small, people don't know how to go against it, and then it just spreads from there on out. In that way, it's like a virus. It's a catastrophe. It's definitely a tool of evil. This book, which has later, I think, been rewritten by Lenin, who was another monster, and definitely a scary one, was brought forth into the people with the idea of like insanely murderous. It was like you start attacking the white cells, you kill all the white cells, you bring forth the virus as the virus cells as the leading cells, and then the other cells can't do anything but die. It's fucking disaster, it's what it is. Anyhow, I close this episode here. I will continue with the other 5 to 8 pages next time, and then I have these stupidities. What is this? Principles of Communism, Demands of Communist Party, Paris Commune, and endnotes. I'm sure that I'm gonna be getting much more of the same thing from here on out, if not worse, because trust me, it can actually go worse. Even though the man said that communism stands for abolition of private property, he could actually like literally say word for word, we mean to kill all life on earth. Anyhow, I close this episode here. I hope that in making this episode I have been able to sort of make more clear why communism is wrong and evil by like every possible mean, every possible perspective. There is no perspective that this can be seen which doesn't lead in catastrophe, unless you are not looking at it, or unless you're looking at it with the claim or with the goal of implementing destruction. There is no other way. I hope that you can learn that this is wrong, and that the Western world, at least the Western world today is far better. It's like an almost polar opposite of communism. That's how good it is. Alright, I stop here now. Bye bye, see you next time.